to IEP Radio, a show dedicated to the education of all things indoor environmental quality related. And now here's your host, Michael Schrantz.
Welcome to IEP Radio. This is episode 24. Back on October 13th of 2020, I was recently interviewed by Dr. Jill Carnahan, and the title of that interview was How Your Clinician and IEP Can Work Together to Help Environmentally Sensitive Patients. You know, the response from the public, those who watched, was overwhelmingly positive. And it was one of those things where I felt that it'd probably be a good idea to get it posted here on IEP Radio. Really, the meat and potatoes, if you will, of what we discussed were this relationship between IEP and clinician, and basically discussing strategies on how your doctor or clinician can work with an IEP if you suspect that there's some sort of a mold exposure. We certainly go beyond mold exposure and recognize that chronic illness is not always labeled by just a mold or bacteria sort of sensitivity or response. We dive into the order of operations. Do we focus on health first? Do we focus on the home first? Is it a little bit of both? We discuss prioritizing steps for your health and home. You know, every situation is unique, and unfortunately, there's not a cheat sheet that provides a one-step-fits-all or 10 steps fits all for each person, because each person might have a varying degree of sensitivities, budget, timeline, and other influences that ultimately prevent them from going in the same direction as perhaps their next door neighbor would. And it can be very overwhelming, and not just for the patient, but the professionals who are working with patients. And so Jill and I attempted to kind of take a look at that picture holistically and just get it down to simple language. We had a great time discussing our own experiences, just to kind of bring truth to some of the challenges and ultimately provide direction on what you can do if you're a patient, for example, to move forward, what your expectations might look like if you're working with an IEP or a clinician in terms of your health and home, and a lot of nuggets throughout. So, I hope the content of our interview is very useful for you and certainly helps you with the needs of your unique situation.
Awesome. Well, Michael, it is such a pleasure to do this. I know we were together at the ICI conference this year online, and it was quite an event. We were both just talking before this about, wow, it was like 12-hour days and so intense and so much fun, but it was an amazing amount of information. And I always get excited talking to people like you, because we have a common passion for helping patients who have environmentally related illness. So welcome. I'm just going to do a little housekeeping and then I'll introduce you. Very basic here. If you want to find more YouTube videos, you can go to my YouTube channel, just Jill Carnahan on the YouTube. Michael has his own program. It's IEP Radio. And where can they find you for more information on what you've recorded?
Absolutely. IEPradio.com. If you go there, there's a wealth of information.
Awesome. Very cool. And so we just decided to do kind of a co-recording here. We'll probably both end up having this on our shows. So you'll get that information in multiple locations. And I want to just introduce Michael Schrantz. He's the founder and operator of Environmental Analytics, LLC, comprehensive indoor air quality consulting company that offers a wide range of services. So the thing I want to say about Michael is there's his website, environmentalanalytics.net. You can find so much great information, a blog, and then of course links to his podcast on all outlets. But what I want to say is just personal about him. You know, here I am, a doc in mold-related illness, and what I love to do is help patients, like my own journey in getting out of a moldy environment and then getting well after that. And I always say, you know, I can diagnose you and treat you in the clinic, but nothing I do is really going to stick or going to make a massive difference in your life if you're still living in a really moldy environment. And that's just the truth. And so I need people like Michael. I value him so much because of his expertise. And what we're so grateful for in ICI is that we have someone like him on board, creating protocols, writing up the latest data, and really helping us guide us doctors. So today, what we really wanted to dive into was, how do we work together better? So whether you're a patient listening online and you want to have your doctor, you know, work with an IEP or understand more about what they do, or whether you're like me practicing and you're listening, if you're a colleague and you're struggling because in your area you don't have a great IEP, we will dive into that and what to do. And I know one of the great things about Michael is he does virtual consults. I would love to, before we dive into exactly what you do and some of the questions, I want to know your story. Like, what got you into this, Michael, and how did you get to where you're at now?
Dr. Jill, thank you for having me first off. And I was looking forward to this interview because it's going to be so rich for people that are in that struggle that you've identified. I'll try to give you the 2-minute elevator speech. For me, it started actually nothing to do with chronic illness. I was 16 years old working for a local air conditioning company. I was at the bottom pole of learning about the basics of airflow. And of course, did I know that it would turn into what it is today? No. As I went through high school and college, I still didn't think I was going to become an indoor environment professional. I thought I was going to be a cog working for some corporate company, but just found a passion because while I was doing that, I was engaged in the division of the air conditioning company had indoor air quality, and we were out looking at things and trying to solve problems that people weren't able to solve. And it was a very rewarding thing where we would go out there and diagnose the home and figure it out. And then fast forward through getting certified and learning more and more about indoor air quality. What had happened is one day, a lady by the name of Dr. Mary Ackerley came knocking on my door with a mutual client and said, "Hey, I saw what you did on this particular home and I like it. Let me explain a little bit about the people that you're dealing with." And fast forward 5-7 years later, and it's been the most rewarding thing being able to not only understand people who have chronic illness, but understand what the concept of low dose environmental exposure means. Because unfortunately, the traditional paradigm with a lot of the inspectors out there that even mean well are missing a lot of the low hanging fruits because they don't know that those fruits are there.
Oh, I love that. So your initial interaction was kind of like what we're talking about now, is how do we actually get together? And I'm sure Mary, who I love and appreciate so much, it was very similar to me as we realize our hands are tied if we don't have good people in the field, and we can learn and understand and do little tiny bits of like guiding them, but we are not the experts. We, again, by default, we have to learn a lot about it, and I become just enough of an expert to guide them to people like you. But tell us, I want to know more. Tell us like what kind of training that you've had or how you get to be what you've done, and what is IEP for people who've never heard that term? Let's go to the real basics.
Okay, sure. Well, so IEP stands for Indoor Environmental Professional. It's kind of a generic term. It's meant to be broad and all-encompassing of people who do environmental work, but I mean, it can cover a wide range. It's not just about mold.
Yeah.
You can have people who deal with chemical exposures and that sort of thing. Predominantly, a lot of the certifications that I acquired came through an organization called the American Council of Accredited Certification, or ACAC.org. And I carry a couple certifications through them. One of them is a council certified indoor environmental consultant. Another one is a council certified microbial investigator. And I carry a couple other certifications, one of which is a Building Performance Institute, which really is just trying to capture knowledge about how a building breathes, how it operates. And so I didn't go to a school of public health. There's not a formal degree program that I'm aware of that you can go to a college university level. It had to build upon multiple certifications to become where I'm at today.
Yeah, no, you are one of the best in the field. And that's why I wanted to really bring people's attention to this. Is not something that is, number one, the level of information that you have, especially with how you work with physicians and patients. What I see is I see a lot of people who've been in the field and maybe know how to find mold in the wall, and they have no clue of how it affects the human body. And maybe I can speak to that really quickly, because we have these people called canaries, and Mary and I tend to have 90% of our offices patients that are super sensitive, and they have mast cell activation, so they're extra reactive. And so what we deal is with this subset that is, say you have a house that has mold and you remediate and you find out the problem and the issue. There might be 80% of people, 90% of people that can go back in there, no problem at all. But what we end up having between you and I is the subset of really, really super sensitive patients. And it's not always mold that's the issue. Tell us just a little bit about what else can be in the environment that can make this, whether it's dust or VOCs from other sources, or go through just a little bit of the spectrum, because we always think about mold, but there's a lot more to it than that, right?
There is. And I mean, to segue into that question real quick, I think that's the trigger. Is a lot of this that we're working on is pioneering work. While there might not be a degree, what we're learning are from references and peer-reviewed studies and consensus among peers of what we're seeing, what we know about sampling, what we know about it exposure. Good news is we are actually working in bed with a local university here, trying to create a program that will one day provide a certification or degree for IEPs, because it is broad, to your question. A lot of the people that we work with have some sort of immune response or inflammatory response to a whole host of things called a soup. And everyone knows when we think of water damaged buildings, we hear about mold. Mold is the celebrity surrogate that can represent a lot of different things, including bacteria that we sample for. But you also have other things, right? We have things like chemicals, volatile organic compounds. We have just the general makeup of the home. It's depending on what reference you look at, what you believe in from the standpoint of, like, say, for example, CIRS. We know that high particulate counts in a home. It's not even limited to, say, mold or bacteria. It could just be the fact that your house was very dusty. Somebody could have an inflammatory response to that. And then now with the segue of EMF, we're looking at those sorts of exposures. There is a soup of things that both the IEP is presented with and also the clinician is presented with. And we try to work together as professionals to say, is there any way we can narrow this down? Because most people can't have you show up in your vehicle and do $50,000 worth of sampling.
Right.
That's the struggle.
Yeah. So I want to tell you like a clinical scenario that I might have, and then I want to hear like how you would, and even if you advise me, hey, Jill, next time you could do this or that, I really am open. I want to hear, because that's why we're here, is like, say here I'm in the office with a patient. So a typical patient that would come in, maybe a 45-year-old female who has started to have more fatigue, more headaches, migraines, brain fog is this elusive term that is not medical at all, but it usually means trouble with word finding or a little bit more cognitive issues with memory. Sometimes they'll notice lack of focus or concentration, or like for me, when I was in mold, what I noticed is I could write a blog article in an hour normally, and then all of a sudden with the mold, it took me longer to slog through. It was a more difficult, like the concentration it took to sit and read or to write or to do the things that I used to do during the mold exposure. It just took me longer and more effort. My brain was tired. So that brain fog is kind of this big term, and that's super common. I would say the mental clarity, the brain stuff is probably one of the number one things we see in a moldy environment, but then it can have things like rashes, histamine, more allergic responses to food. I've had heartburn be an MCAS reaction where people go into a moldy home and have heartburn. So again, this 45-year woman has a myriad of complaints, and I look down her list and I'm like, this is concerning. I need to go down this pathway. And I might look for metabolic issues, thyroid issues, adrenal issues, everything. And in my battery of tests, one of the things I typically do is I will do some markers in the blood that show inflammation. And then I will also do urinary mycotoxin testing. And none of these are one size fits all. So the markers in the blood, things like TGF-beta, MSH, MMP9, VEGF, and then C4A, C3A. And if I see a pattern that's concerning for immune inflammation activation based on an external trigger, and then I see urinary mycotoxins that are high, I say we need to make sure, we don't know for sure yet, but we need to make sure that mold is not in your environment. So what I would typically do is say, depending on what you can afford, you might try just to get your brain around this. Sometimes what I do, Mike, is a little secret thing. And what it is whether it's testing them for food allergies or testing them mold in their environment, even though I know like an ERMI dust sample, we'll talk about in a minute, and you can speak to that and the validity, or plates, they're not the best. They're just a tiny little sample of one little piece of the environment. It does not tell you yes or no there's mold, but it's one thing they have control, and it's fairly inexpensive. And what I see that happens when I do that is they give me the report and I'm like, oh my gosh, you have 30 chitomium. I don't like that. That's real, or even 5 sometimes.
You're cheating. That's a low-hanging fruit, but I like it.
Right.
Very
Okay.
valid.
So let's say there's 200 aspergillus. I'm still like, all right. Right. Okay. So, but then when I do, it's like, okay, look at this. You need to go deeper, and then they'll call you, or then and so sometimes it's like the way to get them to buy in. And I would love to hear your opinion on this, because if you have other advice for me, but I feel like what happens is on black and white paper, then I can make an argument for them going deeper and getting the right inspection. Because you and I both know if they just do, so in a second I'll have you explain the dust plates and the ERMI sample, but if they just do these are not end all be alls. And you and I both agree, I don't even use the ERMI score. I don't like it. It's not valid. But I do look at the individual species, and if I see a pattern of one thing that's way off the charts, I'm like, where did that come from? It just makes me question. But then I can usually get them to call someone like you, and then you come in and then you can help the process. But what would your comments on that process be? What would you change, do differently? What would you advise for us?
You set the stage up very good for me, like you tossed me a lob, so now I can swing away. I love this. I've been salivating. See, so what you did right, selfishly for me, from my perspective, is that you did the part of the clinician up front and you helped us. You were looking at cytokine activity or urine analysis, and you were trying to use biomarkers to help justify, again, nothing's black and white, but to support the idea of, is my patient being exposed to some sort of an exposure? And for the sake of this conversation, because both of us know this could go on for weeks if we
Yes.
did everything, say it was mold exposure we were concerned about. The first thing I would do as the IEP is listen to what about the patient. So you've given us some information. Here's my background. Dr. Jill came back and she says that I have upregulation of these genes. She thinks that I am currently being exposed. I'd like to take a look at that home. Okay, thank you. That helps me. In other words, we're not necessarily looking for EMF. I'm not saying that you're blind to it, but our focus is definitely going to include mold. We would normally start with, after sitting down with the client and learning that information, is doing a very good visual assessment. And it's the things that I've heard you talk with a host of other wonderful people on your show. You're looking at the low-hanging fruits. You have a basement, a crawl space, the attics, the plumbing leaks, the landscaping, the swamp cooler, the HVAC system, and you're trying to see if there's any low-hanging fruit issues that we can point at and say, you don't need to sample this necessarily for me to tell you need to remediate it. But in a vast majority of times, people don't call me up because they have 20 square feet of mold growing up a wall and they just want me to confirm it. I don't get those easy ones.
Right.
The ones I get are the ones where they're like, we either don't see anything, or it's always this ominous, well, we had a leak, but it wasn't a big deal, or the classic, I think it's a problem, but my angry spouse doesn't think it's an issue. I mean, and
little did we know we'd be relationship therapists too, right?
Oh my gosh. As Mary told me, you have to have an associate's and a degree in that just to have this, because it's very real. And a big part of what I think is missing in the professional practice is the heart, the love, the ability to connect with boundaries, healthy boundaries, so that you can understand truly what this person is dealing with, or else you ain't going to know how to communicate with them. But at the end of the day, you might end up looking at sampling. And I won't go 8 levels deep with you, but a couple basics. IEPs have tools they can use, and beyond any visual thing like a pair of eyeballs and a flashlight or an infrared camera or the moisture meter that you're all familiar with, we do hear that there's different types of samples. I think the takeaway is, what can the sample help answer? So if you're doing qPCR analysis, and a lot of people know that as ERMIs or Hertzme's, are you working with an individual who can look at it? I want to share, if you get a chance, let me share my screen. I want to share something with you. But can they look at data, maybe take control samples outside, knowing what they would expect to find inside this home? We call that normal fungal ecology. The term mold-free is misunderstood by too many people. I think what people are trying to say is they don't want to have mold growing in their house, but they're going to have normal backgrounds from the outside. So the ability, I'll share this with you real quick. For example, like this is just a quick sheet of what I've taken of hundreds of qPCR samples, where the little gray columns you see flashing by are outdoor control samples. And I have a whole bunch of individual species, and I've been able to look at that, and you see what's normal. It's no different than people talking about spore trap sampling and comparing indoor to outdoor. Here's my point. Is you want to work with a professional who can look at the house and use tools that might be able to identify something that might not be able to be identified with other methods. I love Petri dish samples. I think it boils down to, what can you help answer? If somebody does a DIY because they initially just want to see what's up, I don't have a problem with that. If you're working with a disgruntled husband, or you just want to wake the people up to, hey, you might have a problem here, that's great. But when you bring in a professional is going to want to reference indoor with outdoors. We need to know what's normal. So it's using the tools to ultimately help isolate a problem. What if the master bedroom comes back elevated? One example of 1,000. And you upon further reflection and investigation, you find out that the master bedroom had a crawl space attic door or access door, and there was a known problem that was identified in the crawl space. Is the reason why the master bedroom is elevated is because of that potential area or something else. So it's working through the minutia of the history and knowing what's there to figure out, can an area sample like qPCR, spore trap, Petri dish, swabs, tapes help answer the question? Or do we need to get into wall cavity sampling? Do we need to start punching into walls a little bit to see if we can locate the actual source?
Yeah, so there's so many questions that come to mind because I
Right.
feel like I got you here and this is so great. And so a couple of things I want to go through, like what I would talk to patients, like questions. I want you to add if there's any, because people listening, the first thing I found this 5 years ago, if I just say, do you have mold in your house? Almost 100% of the time I'm going to get a no. Or no, or even better, we've already had 3 inspections and they've all come back fine, or 5 or more. Like, this is so common. I call it denial because I went through that too. And there's a piece of denial, and then there's a piece of just the reality that no inspector's perfect. And often if
Guilty.
they're, yeah, and I'm same with physicians, right? We're trying to find answers with lots and lots of data, and it's not always easy to come to a really concrete conclusion. But what I look for is patterns. I know you do too. We're pattern recognition detectives. So what we're looking for is, what do all the clues lead to? So when I'm looking at a patient, I get this all the time. What's the one mold test? There's no one mold test. There's no one environmental test. There's so whether I'm the physician or you're the environmental air quality professional, there's no one test and there's no one way. But I want to go back to questions. So what I'm typically doing instead is we're doing the workaround. So do you have a swamp cooler? Do you have any crawl spaces? Have they been sealed? Do you ever smell a musty smell? Have you ever had leakage from your sump pump in your basement? Do you have a basement? Do you have a sump pump? Is there concrete? Is there carpet? Is there tile? Is the tile loose? Have you ever had leakage of your toilet or bathrooms or under your sinks? What about your garbage disposal? How about your washer and dryer? Do you have a front load washer or dryer? Does it smell bad when you take the clothes out, when you open that up? If you looked in the gasket, is there black gunk in the gasket? What about your windows? Are they sealed? Do you ever have condensation on the windows? Is there leakage around the windows? What about your attic? Is that connected to airspace to your home? Is there dead animals in your attic? Is there urine issues with dogs or cats in your house or attic? And so these are just some of the things that I think about. And because when they start to, then you get them thinking, and they'll be like, oh yeah, we had my washing machine flooded and it actually went through the floor and down below, and we put some fans out and we dried it out. What would you
Yeah.
say to that?
My instant response in my head was yellow flag, and it might be upgraded to a red flag. I think that's the issue is, and it gets even worse. First of all, those little nuggets that you gave are brilliant, not just for clinicians that are listening, but for the patients and people that are wanting to learn more. Maybe they're struggling with their own justification to, take the next step, which we can get into in a little bit, or they have that disgruntled spouse issue, which unfortunately is more common than I'd like to admit to everybody. I think at the end of the day, it's an assumption that's being made. Yeah, but we put a fan on there. We have a little Honeywell fan that we bought for $10 and we blew out this wall. It's like, well, I hate the expression, but the devil's in the details. I think that the act was great and valiant. And I'm so glad and so happy that you were proactive. And nobody wants to make this, we talk about fears. We don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill, but we can't just la, 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 and act like there's nothing in that wall because you put a 10-inch circular fan on it, blowing on it. There's so many different areas that could have stayed wet long enough for microbial growth. And that's ultimately one of your concerns as a clinician and an occupant is exposure from that area.
Yeah. So talk just a little bit about, again, this is new to me, but I really start to understand whether it's the lights on your, ceiling, the can lights, or whether it's the outlets, or whether it's your attic space that connects or your crawl space. Why is it important for people to understand the envelope of their home and keeping that air quality, basically as pure as you can and without the interference? I'll just give you an example. I had in my current office, before I ever moved in, the office below me had a slight mold issue and it got remediated. My office was perfect, but I realized that actually sealing the outlets, all the wall space that connected between my office and any other part of the building, I have this like bubble of my office. And part of that is very deliberate because there's no air contamination from the other parts of the building. Why is that important from attic and crawl space, et cetera?
Absolutely. I was trying to pull up another photo I wanted to share with everybody just because it will help. I stole this obviously here on Google from EPA's website, right, about leakage. So what we have is we're dealing with an issue of a conditioned space versus unconditioned spaces. And I'm sure that if you were an artist, you can explain this differently, but here's how I explain it. You have the most control in the areas that you live and occupy in, but there are a bunch of spaces in the home that you don't really condition or control. You don't vacuum it. You don't control the temperature, the humidity, that sort of thing. And a lot of the attic spaces are a big one. Crawl spaces are a big one. Interstitial wall cavities are a big one. And these are areas where, listen, our goal isn't to create a glass house for you. I mean, there are so many complicated issues that I don't know that we have time to get into about, the fact that most every house that's got wood framing is going to have some percentage of lumberyard mold on it, and we consider this maybe normal. Here's my takeaway. If you can separate and isolate out the non-conditioned spaces as much as possible, you have more control. So to what Jill was saying earlier, you have can lights, and these arrows, they're not meant to be one way. They can be two ways.
Yeah.
Summertime in Arizona, baking up that attic, getting that temperature nice and hot, you're going to have a driving force, other things being equal, into the home through these penetrations. And that exists even from crawl space to home. So beyond identifying a source that is justified by a professional that needs to be remediated, you still try and minimize the communication from these areas. And I'm not talking energy efficiency. That's a whole other thing. I just mean from an environmental standpoint, if you can protect and seal off your environment as best as possible, there's some things we need to think about when we do that, like ventilation and how that sealing up the house affects ventilation. But you'll minimize the communication from these interstitial spaces, which can also serve as pathways for the contaminants to get into. I had an issue in my wall. There was growth that was there. Never knew about it, but unfortunately, I had a very leaky wall, and it got underneath and it communicated in my home. You're not always going to know. We don't have mold ray vision. So even with the best of practices, unless we rip that house down to the studs, we're going to be relying on ancillary data, testing, visual evidence, history. And in a situation like that, you may not be able to identify that so quickly. So, thank God that in your situation, you were on the latter end of your story. You were able to seal these things up, and all of a sudden it improved. Not a surprise.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for speaking to that, because I think a lot of people, and what I love, you and I have talked about this before, you're never going to get a perfect space. And so there's mold, there's the outdoor mold, there's indoor mold, and there will be some contaminants in our environment. But it's where's that threshold? And this may be our next area of discussion is, so as a clinician, I'm saying, how sensitive is this patient? And do they have mast cell activation and other things that I can help to moderate so that they actually become, my goal is for them to be less sensitive. Like me, years ago, I was so sensitive, I could barely travel. Now I travel all over and I get mold exposure, and it's not that big a deal. I mean, I just take some charcoal and I'm better in a few hours, but it's not as big a deal as it used to be because I'm less sensitive. So the goal is to decrease the sensitivity. But usually when you and I first see the client for you and the patient for me, they're incredibly sensitive. So we do have to figure out the big issues. We take care of them. You come in and find and give them advice. But there may be some ways to ongoingly maintain their home and get it to a place where they can live and work and play and breathe and survive in it.
No, it's a great topic. It's always a tricky one. I don't think tricky with us just because of how we are, but a lot of people struggle with it. To me, it's like a bell curve, right? And there's a lot of different analogies, but like return on the investment. And on the back side of the curve is that person that has known issues that you want to take. It's like triage. They have a moldy crawl space. They had a flood in the house in their basement. I mean, and you almost don't even need sampling, or maybe you do, and a professional is able to find it. I think, and I presented on this in 2019 at the ICI conference. It's such a wonderful topic. Is what is the goal? I mean, really, the goal is patient recovery. But there's not a set line. It's not like Jill or I can say 14 spores of this species are good, but 15 and your arm's going to fall off.
Yeah.
What we're looking for is an honest and trustworthy assessment of what that person feels is normal fungal ecology. I'd like to expand that to normal microbial ecology as we start looking at other things like bacteria. But the point's still the same, is what is normal for that home? And normal is your outside influences primarily is what we're talking about. Normal would not be mold growing and releasing structures and other contaminants into your home. That's not normal.
Right.
So that's the goal. Now, whether or not, if I could go one step further, normal is good enough for that person, and assuming that you, the patient, or you, the clinician, feel that you've had trustworthy eyes on that home to give it an honest assessment, you start to wonder, well, then number one, could it be something that's not related to the mold, or just as an example? And the other thing is that maybe they're hypersensitive. I have lots to learn from you, Jill. If their bucket overfloweth and they have no room for any exposure, is it possible that the fact that they live in the surrounded by trees in North Carolina with a river that's 20 feet away, that the outdoor ecology is building up in concentration in their home? And for that individual, this is a question, not a statement, is just too much for them. And is there a way that we can turn that sanctuary into more of a sanctuary, knowing that we haven't identified any actual growth in the home?
Oh, I love that you said that, because we always this narrow the mold, which is definitely a big focus, but it's bigger than that. And I just think of two examples. One is after the World Trade Center and the contaminants that rained down after the fire in that building,
But
and literally VOCs and everything you could possibly imagine. These people got really, really sick. Their respiratory tract was affected. Some of them, I have a friend in Boulder who was there at the, downing the World Trade Centers. He still is not the same immune system and respiratory system. And clearly mold probably wasn't the main issue, it was all the other contaminants and the very fine particulate that got inhaled. So that was a situation where the environment was so massively toxic that it permanently affected some of these people. The other thing I think about is after like Hurricane Katrina and some of these hurricanes, where the environment in Louisiana or some of these places becomes so contaminated. And I see your touch there. Is there anything you want to share, like just from the tragedy of?
we see it all.
Yeah,
I'm fortunate to say I don't have direct family. I do have friends who were
yeah,
affected by 9/11, but what you actually touched on right here was more to do about the general struggle. You get caught up in it, and we're human too.
yes, yeah,
This is what you need: is you need caring. I mean, we
yeah,
got to harness it into when you
yeah,
need us to perform, of course, but you need somebody who's caring because it does affect you. The good news is that you don't have to feel like there's no way out. You've been your body is resilient. You may not be operating at tip top shape, but the fact that you're still alive amidst all these other exposures, your body is battling many battles and winning these battles. You just need a little bit of help and guidance and understanding. And so where it's at for me right now is just understanding a lot of people are stuck. Most people that reach out to me are kind of like the same story you have. You're
yeah,
not the first person. You pray and hope you're the last
yeah,
person. And when you see the amount of money
yeah,
they've spent,
yeah,
when you see and not gotten anywhere, I don't care if the money was worth it. You're
yeah,
worth it, but they spin their tires, or they get bad information, or they go on social media groups who
yeah,
mean well but
yeah,
give unqualified advice on things. I've seen families
yeah,
uproot their lives, get
yes,
divorces. I had one do it right in front of me,
yes,
because of a bad ERMI score.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
don't care if it was a fill in the blank petri
right,
dish,
right,
mycotoxin
right,
dust
right,
sample. I don't
right,
care. It's not black and white, folks. We live around this stuff, and there is some normalcy to it. I think it's a matter of working with righteous fighters like Jill and I tend to be, and trying to guide you through, okay, well, here's the low hanging fruit. We agree
yeah,
unanimously that this needs to be taken care of. And as you get on the other side of the curve, it is a process. This journey doesn't take weeks. And I want you to hear this. This journey takes months or years, because you've been this way if you're genetically like this, or you've been dealing with this for most of your life. I wish there was a light switch. And I'll tell you what, if Jill and I find one, we'll tell you what it is, and we'll have it on Amazon. But that it might take time as you recover. And as you recover, we all have seen this before. Your road to recovery isn't this. Your road to recovery is a roller coaster ride.
yes,
And you
yeah,
hope that you're trending good. And as you and your clinician are monitoring using those biomarkers that Jill mentioned earlier, or the urine, whatever cluster of symptoms,
yeah,
whatever that clinician really feels is a good marker for you, then we can adjust as environmental professionals. How much more aggressive do we need to be? Do we want to improve the ventilation in the home? Do we
yeah,
want to add better filtration? You know what? I think it's time to get rid of those carpets now, after all, because they're reservoirs. We don't just say all of the above on the backside of the curve. Let's deal with the obvious and tweak it as we go, because there's no textbook that I can find
yeah.
that gives you a how to do in every situation, and you'll be guaranteed success.
I love that. I knew we would get along so well, because there's, and people are like, well, do I have to get rid of all my books? I have a library in the house. No, store them away if you're concerned. Put them in plastic bins in your garage. You can always go back later. That's what I did. I had my whole medical school library, and later I opened them up. They were still really reactive. And I thought, you know what, for me, it wasn't worth it to keep them. But that's not the decision you have to always make in the time being. And there's valuable things. You just store them if you're concerned. And I love the stepwise approach, because that's part of why the denial is there, because it affects relationships. Say if one person doesn't believe you, you have to actually go up against that in your relationship in order to get well. And so that's a hard thing. I completely understand why there might be denial. And then there's also the denial of it's going to cost money and time, and do I have to move? Not everybody has to move. So there's such a varied, and I love your sensible approach, because I couldn't agree more. On speaking of social media, recently there was someone who was very angry at me and cited me as someone who says that you don't have to avoid mold. I've never said that. I actually think that mold avoidance is a good starting place for the most part, but we live when there's mold, indoor, outdoor, and so you have to become more resilient. And the reason they said that was because our group ICI has been talking about the fact that there's trauma also associated with mold and exposure, and that not only do we want to deal with the mold exposure, the physical, the mental, the well-being, but how do you get this limbic loop of fear to stop going and make it worse? And that's a relevant topic. It doesn't mean that we don't want people to avoid mold and get well that way. And the mold avoidance is not a great term, because you can't avoid mold completely, right?
Right.
So that's just a misnomer. But we really, I still believe, get out of the moldy environment. You won't get well unless you get into a fairly clean environment.
So 2 points. Number one, I don't want to forget, so I'm going to say it right now, limbic system. But the first point is also honor health.
Yes.
That is the goal, is that we want to honor the health concerns. And so to your credit, when we were doing the conference recently for ICI, we were doing a little bit of Q&A, and it's always tough when somebody throws you the question of how do you deal with contents, and you were my wing woman, and you kind of helped me on a couple things, one of which was mattresses, and I thought you knocked it out of the park. When you look at the intimacy of the item and how much you might be exposed to them in the certain situations, first of all, there's going to be a general agreement that you don't want to have a moldy bed, but we don't just trip over ourselves without consideration of its history. So people need to hear that. For those of you that say, well, they just say get rid of everything. Well, no, we don't say get rid of everything. Let's talk about it first and see what that item is, how easy or challenging is it to clean, and how you might be able to either get rid of it or get it out of your environment. The analogy you used was store it in a secure location, get it out, because I use this analogy all the time, and for some people it clicks really well. Your life, you're the patient who's struggling, is not X plus Y equals Z.
Right.
Your life is X plus 99 other variables equals you. And we are trying to remove the variables, the unknown ones, without you having to get a second mortgage or get a divorce, so that we can get you out of the fog that you're in and start your life. It might cost you a lot to throw away that $1,000 mattress, but I don't got my handy dandy calculator here, but I'm guessing you spend a lot more in treatment and other ancillary costs that we haven't even touched on.
Yeah.
So for the first part, just on contents, real quick, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is the limbic system issue, the PTSD, because I'll tell you, if people asked me, Mike, in 2019, what was the biggest thing that you saw that was the most improvement? Like, was it a special test? Was it a special remediation technique? Or what was it, Mike? None of the above for me. What the biggest thing was dealing with the limbic system. It doesn't get rid of your core diagnosis. You're still going to have CIRS if you have CIRS. But I saw people who I had worked with over months and years, where all of a sudden they took a couple of the well-known programs that are out there, and they were a different person. And it was like their utility came back. The smiles came back. They were just a different person. Where do you see that fall into your experience?
Oh, love that. Because again, my experience, one thing too, is if I talk about my experience, it doesn't mean I think that all my patients are like me. I treat people so individually, but all I have inside me is what I experienced to go on, as far as to tell you this is what I felt and and I say that because this was actually a massive aha for me personally, to realize there's this tagging of trauma and mold, and mold itself stimulates through trichosidines. This is science-based, guys. Like, this is not esoteric, woo-woo. There is science that shows that some of these toxins that are produced by mold, called mycotoxins, will actually stimulate areas of the brain, like the amygdala, like the hippocampus. And we can actually see on MRI imaging and other ways where there's atrophy or hypertrophy of the different areas, usually more hypertrophy of amygdala, which is your fight or flight or, scared type of response, and more hypertrophy of something like the hippocampus, which is memory and word finding. These are objective findings. And what I realize is, in treating, we can take away get the environment clean, we can detox the patient, do all the things we need to do, but there's still a lot of fear around re-exposure and and around their health. And I experienced it way back 5 years ago. I remember that, like, being terrified of getting sick again or getting re-exposed, because just to validate you, if you're listening out there and have had mold, it is so hard. You get so sick and you can't think straight, and you are spending money that you don't have. And there's so many things that are very difficult about this, and and it's so mysterious. And because you look okay on the outside, a lot of times people don't believe you. So then there's this crazy bits of this combination that make it a really difficult illness. So I have great compassion if you're struggling with that. And I promise you, look at me, right? I am not telling you it's all in your head. It's not in your head. But your brain has received a signal of danger. And that danger signal will keep stimulating your body and creating the cell danger response, which causes all kinds of havoc in your cells. And if you don't stop that signal and try to help to rehab that signal to say, hey, it's safe, it's okay, through some program, there's hundreds of things you can do. And some of the ones you mentioned, DNRS is out there, Gupta's program, and there's many, many other somatic-based therapies, craniosacral therapies, even binaural beats, which is a type of music that can calm the brain. So there's lots of things you can do. But any way that you address this overactivation of that fear response will help you get well. And that's just, it's proven. I've seen it over and over. And it is not saying, this is a chemical response that causes a fear response. So it's a real response. It's not in your head. But if you address that, you're going to get to the next level.
Yeah, it's not the crazy comment. It's not the psychosomatic
No,
comment.
not at
It's
all.
the opposite of that. It's actually saying, because if you think about it from a different perspective, it's kind of because you've gone through the legitimate stuff you've gone for, you've created this new environment. It's just your survival. This is how you've adapted, perhaps not the best way. Anyways, it's yet another example of the challenges we deal with in trying to help prioritize both environmentally and clinically what makes the most sense on that bell curve for that patient to get better. Because at every step of the way, we know that you're spending money, time, and resources, and big word here, trust. Yes. And it gets overwhelming. You need to align yourself with people who, if they can't help you, they can at least direct you to other professionals that they know can get the job done. And that's what I found myself doing for the last 2-3 years exclusively.
Yeah, so you do. So tell us just a little bit about you. Actually get on the phone, and are you on like Zoom where you could have them walk you around the house, or how does that work with your consultations?
Yeah, so probably the last 2 or 3 years, I've been doing a lot of Zoom, virtual. Actually, it's the same platform. I use the same microphone. Some people recognize it right now. Sure. But it starts a lot the same way. It's a questionnaire, client intake. Give me the history, give me the diagnosis, give me the areas of concern. A lot of times what myself or my office manager will have them do is, give us photos or short videos of the areas of concern. Yes, you're right. There are certain times where if they have Zoom on their phone or their laptop, they can come over and bring it. But to a little side tech issue, a lot of times we find that that's distracting and blurry and the lighting's not right. So to me, the biggest takeaway of the virtual consultations that we've gotten in terms of positive feedback is the quarterbacking, the education, the guidance when they don't know where to start. And in many times it's clients who reach out to us and say, the classic, we've had 2 professionals give us different opinions, and one is recommending $50,000 worth of work. The other one says there's not a problem. We'd really like you to give your opinion. And knowing, and I am by no means, I admitted first one to raise my hand of not being perfect. That's what I'm surgical at doing, is being able to at least acknowledge the information we do know about chronic illness, but at the same exact moment being able to say, well, we don't know this and here's why. However, let's honor the health and what the ultimate goal is, and let's find a way that fits your finances, your logistics, and I can't tell you the number of times where people will send us in their questionnaire, and at the bottom they'll say, please don't say anything, but my husband doesn't believe anything in this. And I will tell them, if it's at all possible, please have that husband show up. And it's classically an engineer background. And I because they don't have nothing to defend. I want to listen to their concerns, and I want to give them that science. They want to know more about the methodology of the testing. They want to know about what is CIRS. Is that some bar napkin idea that you or Jill came up with? We give them the science, and that way they understand that this isn't some guy selling snake oil. We acknowledge what we know, what we don't know. Folks, if you're that husband that's listening that doesn't believe anything, this is not a test code that you get prescribed with conventional medicine. You are off the grid dealing with chronic illness, functional diagnostic medicine, things that are new, that are paving the way, that are identifying the thing that 50 years ago your old man told you just to shut it up and take an Advil and quit your complaining. We're learning more and more, and you have incredible people like Jill who's been there, who can help you get out of the weeds when it's not black and white, because sometimes we deal with people who think that in order to have a problem of mold exposure, it needs to be that 20 square feet of mold growing up the wall I mentioned earlier.
Yeah. And like you said, it's so not often, I mean, not always the case. Sometimes it is. Let's go to after. So say they found the 20 feet up the wall, they took out the wall, they did everything right.
Sure.
To me, the reason why some people can't stay in that remediated home is what the aftercare. It's like after surgery, what do you need to do? And I want to talk a little bit about that, because I think that for me has been a big eye opener in getting them to a safe place in that remediated home. So what would you recommend, like small particulate clean HVAC system? What would be your order of operations after remediation to make sure that that home can be the cleanest it could be for that patient?
Sure. So to me, if I'm hearing you right, the term is how can we create and or maintain sanctuary at that point?
Perfect.
All right. So that's helpful. So there's 4, if I do my math right, fundamental things that we will talk about with people to do. And one of them depends on where they live for sure. And that is certainly housekeeping, removing reservoirs. So this is an issue of cleaning, dust cleaning, vacuuming, damp wiping, dry wiping, getting rid of reservoirs if possible, like carpets and rugs. Rugs are easier to deal with. I don't like to walk on hard floors that much either, so I get it. And then the next level, of course, we talk about is filtration. And so there's all sorts of options there. There's portable
Quick question
filtration.
on the first one. I'm sorry to interrupt. What about plants or water features? What would you say about, are those?
It goes back to that equation issue where, you'll have somebody that raises their hand and say, well, we saw this thing from NASA that said that it's good at removing certain VOCs. And I go, that might be the case, but your clinician is telling you that you're having upregulation of your genes from mold. And I see a planted tree in your living room. So let's minimize the variables and let's get it out of that environment for now. If you want to be a green thumb after the fact, let me honor that. I'll buy you, I try to humor them and say, I'll help you with that. But I would stay, and water features is the same thing. They're prevalent, especially larger features for biofilm production. And let's be clear, we're not saying just because you have biofilm production that you're automatically going to have an exposure, but it's kind of an elephant in the room concern to answer that question. When you get to filtration, it can either be portable systems or whole house systems. Whole house are just kind of what you might have under your air handler. Some people have a standard 1-inch filter, or they'll upgrade it to a more robust, higher MERV rated filter. And we can get into some of those details after I give you the overview. Portable systems, we're familiar with a slew of them. I'm a big fan of air filtration. I'm more hesitant to initially recommend purification only because of what we don't know. And I've interviewed a company on IEP radio. I think they have wonderful products. It doesn't change the variable equation that we talked about. And then we get into mechanical ventilation. Mechanical ventilation is bringing in air mechanically properly when you feel like that house that you just got done sealing up is built too tight, and you need to help remove contaminants that won't otherwise be removed with the former 2 methods. Those are or 2 methods. Those methods are the big boys. The one thing, of course, is moisture control. So if you're in a humid climate, let's pick on Florida. You're going to likely have to have some sort of additional mechanical dehumidification system to regulate those moisture levels, because with the exception of a few cases, your air conditioning system is not going to be able to get you in that target relative humidity of somewhere between, say, 40 and 50%. And so that might mean getting supplemental dehumidifiers. Some people roll their eyes and go, I don't got time to deal with that. I don't want to have to work with that. So they'll look at getting whole house dehumidifiers that they can integrate into their system. When you do those 4 things, and again, your example was you've already dealt with known sources, on the inside of the home, I think that's a great, it's a big, but a great starting point to maintain that sanctuary. Where the minutia starts to come pouring out is every home is different, and you might have other underlying issues that need to be addressed first. What if they cleaned up the remediation or the mold in the crawl space, but they didn't address the moisture that was getting in there in the first place to make that happen? Sounds to me like they may need to have some drainage improvements, and I would be helping them get on that before I have them upgrade their mechanical ventilation system in a mold complaint.
Yeah.
So it
So
depends.
that's so helpful, Michael. That's what I want to do is kind of do, and I think you kind of mentioned it in the very beginning there, because that was so thorough. But one of the things I find is that after the remediation, getting a really, really deep, we call it small particulate clean. It can
I
be
see.
right, and it doesn't have to be like, there are companies that come and charge a lot of money for that. I believe you can do this yourself or get your person, as long as you give them good instructions. This is not a difficult thing. It's
No.
just a detail thing. Is that right? Would you comment on
It
that?
is. When you said remediation, in my mind, I was thinking the cleaning, everything's
That
been
should
done.
go
I get
with
to
it,
walk.
right? But I think some people don't. So you're right. A good remediator will actually include the clean, right? But not all.
A newer, right? A newer aged, chronic illness aware, new paradigm way of thinking would probably talk to you about whole house cleaning.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we'll save it for another interview. There's politics involved and other things that they would be specific to the areas they're working on. But here's the takeaway.
Yeah.
The small particle cleaning that you're talking about, you're right. You don't have to have a professional do it. Beyond any additional cost, it's going to be a matter of like logistics. Can you physically do it? I don't really want somebody who's got CIRS as just an example,
Right.
to be doing the work.
Yeah, exactly.
But there are a couple different DIY small particle cleaning that involves a process of misting to drop particles out of the air, followed by rounds of cleaning that a person could probably get done in their house for less than $1,500, comparatively to a professional who might bring with them that experience, that efficiency. You don't got to, some of this requires that you move contents out of the home. I'm looking at your screen right now. Those books would have to
All
get
those
moved
books.
out. But when money is an issue, what I would recommend clients do is they look at these options, but do yourself a favor. If you're going to spend the money, reach out to an IEP like myself. It doesn't have to be me. There's plenty of people on ICI's website. We can talk about that in a second that you can reach out to. Let them be your quarterback and make sure that whatever process you're doing not only is seemingly appropriate, but the timing of it is appropriate. You get done telling me that you're going to do a remodel in the kitchen a week later. Why don't we wait until the remodel is done? So there's
Amen.
that quarterbacking.
Yes. Yeah. Order is like, that has to come kind of last after you, not last, but like, you don't want to do a big clean. And you don't want to tell me, maybe I'm wrong on this, but HVAC system, shouldn't that be cleaned either simultaneously before you do the small particulate? Because that's just going to disperse.
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
No, you're right. It's
Okay.
just because HVAC systems get their own topic to discuss about, and it's one of those things where there's the challenges of duct cleaning. But yes, if you're going to do duct cleaning, let's just assume that was the decision to be made. I would normally have them do that before they do the final clean, because there's going to be little onesie-twosies that are going to escape out of that.
Okay, I want to make, because that's what I tell patients, I want to make sure we are aligned with that, with order. And this is all perfect world. It doesn't always go like that, but
right.
Well, good. Well, as we wrap up, what's fun? And first of all, I just want to acknowledge, I love your heart, Mike. I love what you bring to this. I love the passion and the purpose, because you are so above and beyond just the technical details. You really bring, like you've clearly shown us here, even in the interview, but I just want to acknowledge who you are as a human being and your character and what you bring to this. And that is so rare, and we appreciate you so much. So thank you.
That same compliment is extended your way. I've seen tears, and that's what's missing. You don't, our job isn't to fall apart on the job site, but our job is to care.
Yes.
If you can't empathize, at least sympathize and be able to realize the struggles these people are going to, because it's a cadence that you have to figure out with these patients. You just can't come all in there all militaristic with all a wealth of information and think that everyone's going to jump in line behind you. So thank you for your kind words.
You are welcome. So let's share our mutual organization, ICI. We're both on the board, so that's our only connection as far as just, it's a great nonprofit group with physicians and IEPs and information. It's really geared towards teaching the clinician. So if you're a clinician, you should join. But if you're a patient or client, you might find resources there or people to call. And then we've given, go ahead and give your website again, Mike, where people can find you, and anything else you want to say about that.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple quick things. If you're wanting to reach out to me professionally, environmental analytics, .net, environmental analytics, one big long word, .net, not .com. And you can reach out. You can look at all the information, my background. There's a contact page. That's how we filter in 99% of our clients, because we want to honor your concerns and not get you lost in the phone calls and all that. For free resources, hot topics. We've talked about air conditioning. We talk about remediation. Those things are covered. Great interviews. IEPradio.com. IEPradio.com. Take a look up there. It doesn't just have video cast where you can see us talking and bringing up references and all this good stuff. There's also audio cast or podcast so you can listen in your car. And also there's references. A lot of times it's like, well, what study? You keep claiming a study. Well, I've listed it there for you. So there's a dedicated page for you to reference it in case you are a data-driven person and you want that science. And then finally, I'll plug ICI. For those of you who are looking for resources, actually, let me do this real quick with you. Right here is a Find Get Help page. This is from their website, ici.org. You say click help. You go here. You can find people that are members, clinicians and IEPs who might be in your area and help you. For the clinicians who are wanting to build a network of professionals in IEP, if you already have one, God bless you. If you don't and you're looking for guidance, consider reaching down to a couple professionals that are on here. Some of these professionals provide virtual services and they can guide you and help you build that network. There's a great free resource of how to pick an IEP, a free document available, high level stuff for free to explain a little bit more about IEPs. ICI is doing the best they can to teach people as rapidly as we can, but to honor the science and not get ahead of ourselves. And that's what I love about this organization.
Me too. And Michael, we are so fortunate to have you as part of it. You've just been spearheading these efforts, and I'm beyond grateful. So I want to publicly acknowledge all of your work. Thank you so much for your time today. Better than I hoped. We'll have to do this again.
Yeah.
So hope you all enjoyed this. You can re-listen here. You can check out IEP Radio for more, and then you can also go to my YouTube channel for more videos. I will be sure and include the links we mentioned on the Facebook Live as well. So if I'll hop in there in a few minutes and make sure those are all included. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Dr. Jill. Appreciate it.
The content of this show is for informational purposes and represents the sole opinion of the host and its interviewees only. Any reliance on the information provided in this show is done at your own risk. Additional opinions and/or research may change our current view of the topics spoken in this show. We do our best to minimize any inaccuracies presented and make legitimate efforts to back all comments with our own field experience, independent literature, or studies that support the topics discussed. This information should not be used to make conclusive decisions regarding your health or exposure. Ultimately, all questions and/or concerns regarding your health should be addressed by a qualified physician. Additional exposure concerns and/or questions pertaining to the health of your home or building should be addressed by qualified and on-site professionals. Any and all products and services discussed in this show should not be construed as a recommendation, endorsement, or guarantee that their use is appropriate for your situation. In short, we hope this information is of value to you, but please do not act upon it without actual and individual consultation and guidance by professionals who have taken the time and appropriate collection of data to assess your unique situation.